some more great footage of South Texas, courtesy of Greg. I do want to take things back to last Friday, the 29th of April. We had a major weather event, including, of course, Reed's interesting drone footage out there east of Wichita. Let's take a look at the radar. We take it back to 4 p.m. Very noticeable dry line extending from Enid up to Salina. There it is. Storms starting to form along that dry line, and there's also a cold front back in here. We were looking at a pretty wide risk area extending all the way down towards Wichita and up into southern Nebraska. Around 5:30, the boundaries really firm up on radar. We get the inevitable storm development. Numerous storms going up east of Salina and Concordia with a lot of tornado warnings, and then this other cluster down around Wichita. Then from 7 p.m. on, this is how it looked. The storms up north don't look as great on this radar because I wanted to keep it simple and just use the Wichita radar. But that southern storm did become a star on social media. Here's a closer look at it using one of the higher tilts and zooming in on Wichita. There it is moving to the northeast. Get the warnings going up. Then, of course, the tornado warning follows as it moves through Andover, and then it heads on out into El Dorado. And that's going to be the last frame up to 8:30 p.m. Now, I am having to use the higher tilts because we're really close to the radar. We do get a better picture sampling this up near the cloud base. So here's the 1.3 degree scan with the streets. That's going to be the tornadic circulation right there. The meso, that's going to be this. And you can see that head on up into Andover. As it moves up towards this highway here and passes north, you can really see that TVS coming out. Looking at about 50 out and 42 in, that's almost 100 knots of circulation. And you can see on the reflectivity a tornadic debris signature. That's part of that hook. Kind of looks like a dry hook since we're kind of down low and very close to the radar. Anyway, that heads on up across Interstate 35. There it goes. So it's taken a path kind of like that. And you can see the new cyclic development out towards the southeast near Augusta. There's the preliminary storm reports. That's the Andover tornado, and the cyclic tornadoes that followed are further out towards the northeast. El Dorado, Augusta, and out into Greenwood County. However, a lot of tornadoes on the cell further up north near Marion. And of course, we're going to wait for the final determination in about a month. That'll be published in Storm Data. And that will pull all of this information together. Returning to today, we're back in the thick of it. A moderate risk around the Childress to Vernon area, and that's surrounded by an enhanced and slight risk across much of Oklahoma and northwest Texas. No watches in effect as we record this, but the mesoscale discussions are out. And that's a good place to get a handle on things. It describes the thinking that goes into the watch boxes, and you can read through that and partake of the information and see what's going on. So the proper place to start out today is with the surface chart. There's the tropical air flowing into Texas and Oklahoma. You can see that today we've got a warm front in the picture. A warm front always means the potential for easterly flow, which helps improve the shear profile. Looks like a cold front extending out into Arizona, and then the rest of that front connects back up into the northeastern U.S. A lot of fog showing up, not only in the cold sector where we have the so-called overrunning and the upslope flow, we've also got it around Del Rio and Abilene, which tells us that there could be some fairly substantial boundary layer moisture. There is some cold air coming down from the Great Lakes region. bringing 40s, 50s, and a few lower 60s into the Ohio River Valley, and some of that's affecting the northern plains as well. And here's that fresh outbreak of Pacific air coming into the Four Corners area. Let's head out into the Pacific. Taking a look in that region, looks like a incipient cold front, occluded front offshore. Doesn't look very well developed because it's in this surface ridge, so I kind of indicated it as shown, kind of acting as an antifront there. And then going into the Gulf of Alaska, occluded system, not really much of an air mass contrast until you get back up into the Brooks Range, and this has been a persistent pattern over the past 2 weeks, forming a lot of cold air there in the Chukchi Sea. Pretty quiet in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, but we've got a continued very cold air mass across the Hudson Bay region. That's one reason we're getting this progression of fronts into the Midwest and northeastern U.S. We're generating a lot of cold air, and temperatures not quite below freezing or below zero, but certainly in the single digits in a lot of places. And the coldest temperature that I'm seeing on this chart, 7 degrees. I'm not sure what station that is, probably Longstaff Bluff out in that area, but Thule, a nice warm 27 degrees. And then heading into the Atlantic, not much going on. Iceland looks a little bit blustery there. You can see that snow coming down. And then circling around back in eastern Canada, another Labrador system, some cold snow back behind it, and then a lot of overrunning isentropic lift in the northeastern U.S. Let's check in real quick on Big Rig Steve. He's somewhere in this area. Let me go take a look at his radar. Yep, the Big Rig Steve travel radar. He's heading from Indiana into Ohio, and it appears he's right there on the state line. That's going to put him in this cold advection zone. A little bit of fog, low cloud, probably some cold conveyor stuff circulating around the back. And there's how it looks from the driver's seat. He is eastbound. Looks like some stratocumulus. Looks somewhat convective. I think there's some air mass modification going on, some destabilization in the lower boundary layer. And that's spreading out into stratocumulus, probably just above those bases up in, can't really see it, but up in that area there. So thank you, Big Rig Steve. Let's check out the severe weather in Texas. The visible satellite imagery shows that we are plagued by cirrus. So that's going to limit how much useful data we get out of this product. But we do see the front right through here. Notice the transition in the low cloud character. You got these transverse bands north of that front, and then cloud streets south of that. That shows up really well. It's a shame about the cirrus. Can't really see much further west, but looks like a couple of towering cumulus, early CBs poking out around, I guess, McLean and west of Amarillo. And then we have anvils up to the north. That's going to be well back in the cold air, so that'll be elevated stuff. And there is more of that to the north. Kind of hard to see, but that's it. So we let that go, checking things out. Any of the storms that are just north of the warm front, those could be severe. Tornadoes are unlikely, but they could produce hail and wind, depending on how thick the cold air is. If it's fairly shallow, the odds for that do increase, because that means you have a lot of moisture close to the surface. So let's check out the radar. Oh, yeah, before I do that, some upslope stuff out around Raton. So the Raton Mesa may fire as well. Now, at this early stage in the convective day, the radar is useful for finding where you have cells currently going, whether there's any boundaries from those cells, and whether there's boundaries out in the clear air that you can pick up. And I really don't see any, but I do see the cell west of Amarillo. There it is right there, probably coming up to about I don't know, it's already, yeah, that's 40,000 feet, so that is going to be an early stage of cumulonimbus development. So this stuff up here along Interstate 40 doesn't look that great, but maybe some hail in that storm. And doesn't look like much of a circulation. Next stop, of course, the mesoscale surface picture. This is extremely important. So let's put a couple boundaries in here, starting with the warm front. You can see we're up to 81 around Durant, contrasting with 66 out around, I think that's going to be Ada. So the warm front is lifting north of the Red River, coming up towards Frederick. Looks like it's past Frederick. That's it with 78 degrees. Altus still 67. And it gets colder as you get up towards Weatherford and Elk City. Looks like the cold air hanging on in Childress, so we got to drop that boundary south of there. And let's see, after that, Amarillo, I think they are just barely in the cold air, and the boundary extends all the way up towards Raton off the chart. What about the dry line? The dry line is pretty far west. I'm going to start out way down here around Odessa. Looks like that goes right through Odessa, up to La Mesa, and maybe right on Lubbock and Interstate 27. So the deeper moisture, that's going to be out here along the Caprock, just off the Caprock actually, heading up from Eastland, up through Seymour, and towards Oakland Union. And up to the north we can see the low IFR ceilings, quite a bit of that up there, very grungy, soupy weather. And what else do we have? Nicely backed flow along the warm front, winds out of 140. That's going to certainly add curvature to those photographs. Talking about this area right here. That's nice backed winds and proximity to the low-level moisture. Dew points close to 70 degrees right through here. Those are going to be the higher values out around Wichita Falls, and we pick up 70 around Stephenville. So this is going to be a pretty cut and dry development. As we get the heating during the day, we should see cells going up along that warm front and basically on the northwestern apex of that moisture ridge. So that's the moisture ridge coming up from Wichita Falls. So it looks like southwestern Oklahoma, pretty good chance there, and maybe down close to Childress where that cold air is hanging on. And of course the old cheat sheet, the high resolution rapid refresh. Now the high resolution rapid refresh is actually a fairly decent model. It's not always correct, but it gives you an idea of the evolution of the event. So it looks like stuff forming pretty much right on that moisture axis and then tracking across the warm front into south central Oklahoma, around Norman, into Bowie, Decatur, and then some more stuff out around Amarillo. Looks like maybe that cluster that we're seeing around Amarillo may become more surface-based as it approaches some of the deeper moisture off the Caprock, some of that circulating around north of the warm front. Of course, there is the potential for those cells to become elevated as they head into some of that colder air north of the warm front. And then more stuff apparently forming south of Childress, Paducah, Knox City, and heading up into the Vernon area. But the high-resolution rapid refresh does not think that stuff is going to become dominant. It appears most of that is going to be in southwestern Oklahoma. So everything is certainly coming together right there. The details, of course, are going to be, it's going to boil down to how that warm front evolves as it lifts north of the Red River. And whether it does, for all I know, that cold air may hang on at Childress for a while. This is really where the satellite imagery would be very helpful. And it is a tough nut to crack because of all that cirrus, but if you really look at this, you can see a blob right here where there's no movement. That's going to be the stratus underneath this cirrus. That's about the extent of it. And I do think as we get that hole moving over the stratus, we're going to see some erosion and maybe the winds coming around to the south at Childress in a couple of hours. And let's take a look at our proximity soundings for southwestern Oklahoma. We're going to go right up to this time before, let me see if there's a current update. Yeah, 18Z. I'm going to put this right on maybe just west of Altus. Look at that sounding. Good curvature. And that's assuming a east-northeast wind at 8 knots. That's going to be north, just north of the warm front where we want it. The storm motion, right movers going to the east-northeast at about 25 knots, so the storms definitely will be chaseable. Some capping being indicated. The high-resolution rapid refresh is expecting that capping to be broken across many areas, though. Some fairly good instability above that. The D-Cape's up near 900, so some of the storms will be outflow dominant. And up above 20,000, picking up that cirrus in the model data. And finally, looking at the National Severe Storms Laboratory CB-WOFS short fuse forecast model, you can see that little thermal troughing right there indicating where that warm front is. So I'm going to draw that front. Looks about like that. There could be a little mesolow right there, actually. But you can see how it lifts northward there. Looks like it passes Childress maybe mid to late afternoon. And if this develops like the model says, this stuff may be a little bit too elevated. The cells on the tail end may have the best potential for development, especially if they can track along that boundary into the Hollis-Altus area. This I'm not really sure of. Obviously, they're not getting the better shear down there in northwest Texas. So I think the chase hordes are probably going to be focusing on that area right there. And of course, I would not rule these out either, depending on how they develop. There's a look at the SRH for this afternoon. The enhanced SRH north of that warm front in the Childress area, and also picking up a little bit of an axis from about Haskell up towards Bowie. The supercell composite parameter does show that we can't rule out that area north of Interstate 20, so that could be a fairly good environment. There's a look around the Graham, Texas area. Backed flow at the surface, winds out of 150 at 10 to 15, so we do have some curvature there as well. And some fairly beefy moisture, better than what we have in southwestern Oklahoma. There's the significant tornado parameter. It is elevated a little bit more around Windthorst and Graham, so I think those cells may be heading into a fairly rich area later on. And it looks like the tornado forecast does not really go far enough into the afternoon. But that's what we've got. And we've really got to get this wrapped up, so let's take a quick look at the forecast. Looks like that cold front is a little bit further north than where I had it on the analysis. Warm front extending eastward. And let's go into tonight, into tomorrow. That's going to be tomorrow morning. Surface low in north central Oklahoma, cold front pushing into the Interstate 287 area northwest of Fort Worth, and MCS moving into St. Louis. In the afternoon, we see new development out around East Texas and southern Arkansas. The main low, including up there in Kansas, that's going to be it right there. New Bear Clinic zone in northern Arkansas. So your fronts are going to look something like that. And then things kind of push into the southeastern U.S. and Appalachian region. So an occlusion hanging back in the Ohio River Valley, some cold air filtering into the south central U.S., but the return flow picks right back up for Saturday. Not much going on for Saturday itself, some storms in the northern plains. And then for Sunday, looks like more moisture coming north. Looks like a lot of capping and not much weather. Some upslope flow in the South Dakota, Nebraska area, but it gets really stormy out in the western U.S. That's going to be the frontal boundaries right there. And then one last look at the radar. We need to get this wrapped up and out the door. Storms around Amarillo and near Plainview. Should be a brief window of severe weather on this before it hits the cold air. This has some potential over the next couple of hours. And then, of course, we are expecting more stuff north of Abilene. A little bit more of a question. And, of course, we're going to have a lot of severe weather probably in southwest Oklahoma and maybe further south. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to leave you with some more footage of South Texas. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. We'll see you back here on Friday for another edition of Forecast Lab. Have a good one. Bye-bye.